Um, Carrie is the Education and Outreach Manager for an organization called CERF Plus. And I first learned about CERF Plus when I was getting a recommendation for one of our scholarship applicants. And the person I was speaking with had been a member of the board of directors of CERF Plus. And she started to tell me all about the great things that they were doing and how they were committed to ensuring the success of craftspeople. And so I thought that it would be a great idea to have someone from CERF Plus come and tell us all of the great things that they're doing. And Carrie has agreed to do that. We would like to make this a very, very interactive presentation. So I hope that people have had a chance to go to the CERF website and learn a little bit about it. And if you have questions, just raise your hand, or we'll try to break periodically for questions. And I'll turn it over to Carrie now. So Carrie, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Frost, and thank you all for giving me this opportunity to share more about CERF Plus and what we do. And like Frost said, I am the Education Outreach Manager. I have been at CERF Plus for 12 years now. And then my own artistic background is kind of all over the place. As a musician for several years, I'm a beginning metalsmith. And in college, part of my senior thesis was a body of wood-based sculpture. So while I am by no means a woodworker myself, I'm not entirely unfamiliar with a wood shop. And so I'm happy to be here with all of you and get to see some of your studios in the backgrounds as we look around in this Zoom meeting. And so I put together a presentation to kind of give an overview of the who we are and why we exist and how we exist, and most importantly, what we do and what you might be able to make use of yourself. And so I'm going to run through that and stop for questions here and there, and also by all means feel free to chime in and ask. I will try not to speed talk, but I make no promises, so also chime in if I'm turning into a motor mouth as I get excited as I run through this. Tell me to slow down, don't be shy. I will turn my camera off for this because I'm sure some of you have this experience. Wireless bandwidth isn't always great in Vermont. I'm up here in Montpelier. We're a national organization. We're based out of Vermont, so I'm just north of you all. And I have definitely had my Wi-Fi be not happy with me by giving a presentation while on Zoom. So like I said, let me just turn off my camera so that no one gets upset on the tech end on my side. And then I'll share my screen. So would the host give me the ability to share a screen? I'm getting an error that...
Give me 1 second. I'll try to figure out how to do that.
Okay.
So do I hover over you?
Yeah, try hovering over and see if that's an option in the three dots.
Rename, put in waiting room. Hold on a second.
And if it's not possible, I can talk through everything, but visuals just make things better.
Multiple participants can share simultaneously. One can, we have an advanced share. Who can share? It might be set like that when you plan the Zoom. I don't think we realized you had a share screen. I don't know if I can change it. I can try. If you want to get started, I'll poke around.
Yeah, no worries. I'll just talk through things instead, and in which case then I will turn my camera back on, since there's no worry of making my camera angry anymore. Okay, so just to give an overview of who CERF Plus is and what we do and kind of how we came to be, that CERF in CERF Plus originally stands for Craft Emergency Relief Fund. We were founded in 1985 as a grassroots mutual aid organization by craft artists who found that when they were at shows, they were always passing a hat for a fellow artist who had had a flood or a fire or an illness or an injury. And so formalized that kind of, I think of it as like an analog Kickstarter origin into this organization that provides emergency relief grants for artists who work in craft disciplines. And then throughout that now 35-year history, we've also grown to an organization that can provide resources and information and education and training, emergency readiness resources. We advocate on behalf of artists who work in craft disciplines and have our emergency relief, and then also provide career protection tools. And I'll give examples as I run through this of what some of those things are. But our founding mission is that Craft Emergency Relief Fund. And so what that is a $3,000 grant to artists who work in, say, wood or ceramics or glass or fiber, metals, et cetera, who've had some kind of career-threatening emergency. So that could be a fire, a flood, illness, theft. And then the other component of what we try to do through our emergency relief work is, say, if we know of a supplier who's willing to donate tools, connecting that supplier with artists who have had an emergency, which works well for the supplier, because since we know the artist, we know that that emergency really happened, we've already kind of done that side of the work, and then the supplier kind of knows they're really getting the equipment that they're willing to donate to someone who really needs it. And so I wanted to give a couple examples too of some woodworkers who've had emergencies that we've responded to, just to kind of help cement, concrete examples of what this can look like. There's a woman in Puerto Rico named Carmen Rosario, who mostly does turned wood bowls. And during Hurricane Maria, water completely damaged all of her machines and the roof of her house and her shop. So she got a grant to help make repairs. Then there's an artist named Michael Puryear in Shokan, New York. And he had one of those situations where, despite having, really safe equipment and the best studio practices, there are just freak accidents. And a table saw that he was using threw a blade and hit him in the trachea. And he's lucky that his wife was nearby and saw the accident and could act fast and get him to the hospital. So he used his emergency relief fund to help cover medical bills and that time when he couldn't be working in his studio while he was recovering. And then the last artist I wanted to share in this example is a woodworker in Philadelphia named E.J. Duff. And their studio was robbed and $15,000 worth of power tools were stolen. And if you could see the presentation, you could see I have a photo of where she'd been listing all of the equipment that was lost and the itemized value of it. And so obviously use that emergency relief grant to help rebuild equipment and supplies for the woodworking practice. And so that's our standing emergency relief fund. And then with the advent of,
So I just wanted to interject here that one of the reasons I thought it would be extremely valuable for this group to hear this presentation is when I was talking to Sophie about CERF Plus, I mentioned that one of the members of the guild, I guess it was 3 years ago now, was in a terrible truck accident and was severely injured in that accident. And I asked if that would be the kind of a situation where CERF Plus would be interested in contributing to that person for their recovery. And she said, by all means. And so, I think that this is the kind of thing that it's valuable for everybody in the guild to know about the various programs that you have, because we're something like 55 members and things happen, accidents happen. And so it's very valuable to have an organization like yours interested in helping people that get into trouble that way. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. And exactly, that's the type of thing that we respond to. We also rely on people like you knowing about us. I hope none of you ever need us, but just that you might have that connection if you hear about someone who's had that emergency, to say to them either, hey, did you know about CERF Plus? Look to them for a grant, or either that or contacting us directly and saying, did you hear about this artist who had that emergency? You might want to reach out to them and see if they could use some help, whichever you feel is appropriate depending on the situation. Because since we do work nationally, we don't necessarily know every artist working in a craft discipline in every community. So the more connections that we can have to help facilitate that when there is an emergency is incredibly, incredibly helpful. And then, so that's the standing emergency relief fund. And then with COVID-19, we also had, on top of that, a dedicated COVID-19 emergency relief grant of $1,000 that ran in 2 cycles. The second cycle just closed last week, but we might be opening up for future cycles. So if you know of artists working in craft disciplines who are really struggling with food, housing, or medical needs due to the pandemic, definitely point them to us to stay connected in case we are able to launch another just COVID-specific emergency relief grant. We've also done a lot of work around advocacy in regards to COVID at the federal level, making sure that as, and we're continuing this work as relief continues to roll out, and we hope there's more that'll roll out, that it'll be accessible to artists, that pandemic unemployment assistance that was part of that act was available to the self-employed and independent contractors as a result of the advocacy that CERF Plus was engaged in, because usually I think a lot of you know that people who fall under that self-employed or independent contractor rubric don't have access to unemployment assistance. We're also continuing on our website to aggregate other funds that we hear about that might be available, or organizations that are doing really timely work around COVID-19. For example, there's an organization based out of New York called Creative Capital that's been doing a lot of webinars around what are financial implications you should be thinking about if your business isn't functioning the way it normally does, or tax components, or if you're considering taking your work online, things to consider. So we post links to organizations doing that kind of work as well, which isn't necessarily our particular wheelhouse, but it's adjacent to that emergency kind of recovery and preparedness that we're engaged in. And so that's the Emergency Relief Fund, which is our founding mission. But ever since Hurricane Katrina, we've been working really hard to fold in emergency preparedness as well, because a $3,000 grant is great, but that's not an amount that's going to make someone whole. And no amount of money we could raise would ever put us in a position where we could, fully meet the financial burden of someone's emergency. Our funds really can serve as that bridge to either an insurance payout or FEMA assistance. And so we've been doing a lot of work for the past 15 years now to help support artists in preparedness measures so that if something happens, it impacts them as little as possible. And so just to give a concrete example of what something like that could look like when the preparedness isn't in place, there's an artist we assisted in Iowa. She's a ceramic artist, and her studio flooded. Throughout her career, she'd been developing a suite of glaze formulas, and she'd been keeping those formulas in a binder in her studio, and just in that binder in the studio. And when her studio flooded, the binder washed away. And so there was, a whole career's worth of work that was gone in an instant. So, that might not be relevant to you, but I think we all, in whether artistically or in the studio or in our personal lives, we have that, that binder of glaze formulas, that thing that we really can't afford to lose. And so the first iteration of our emergency preparedness work was to come up with the studio protector. It used to be a physical object, now it's a portion of our website. And it's set up to help you run through what emergency preparedness and recovery could look like for you. So say, for example, you want to start thinking about, well, what are my risks as an artist, or what are my risks in the studio? We have tools to help you do that kind of, risk assessment. And then say, one of the things you figure out is, well, if something happened and there was, a physical emergency in my studio, maybe a flood or a fire, I don't have a great inventory of what I could lose. We have tools to help you start doing that inventory, or some really specific resources too, like information on what to think about if you're in a hurricane-prone area. Up here in the Northeast, we don't tend to get heavy hurricane, but it's not unprecedented. I mean, Hurricane Irene hit Western Mass just as much as hard as it hit us up here in Vermont. So there's precedent too for looking around my studio and thinking, what are the considerations that I need to be taking as I think about how to really protect my studio and my practice. And then it runs through, what if an emergency is coming? What do I need to think about getting out of my studio? Or then following through if an emergency happens, whether that's tips on how to work with FEMA to get assistance, or really granular, how do I triage my studio? What do I need to be thinking about? We have some videos on dealing with flood damaged materials, and some videos and information on thinking about how to help out or how to manage volunteers. Say, if you had a studio that was flooded and people are showing up saying, how can I help? How to even think about that, because after an emergency, it can be really hard to even think about what do I do, let alone how do I engage someone else in helping me. And then also part of the Studio Protector website, we've done a lot of work on getting information around insurance out to artists. I think something like 62% of artists we found in a survey or a study we did a couple of years ago were underinsured for business losses. And I think it's really important to note, in case you aren't aware of this, homeowners insurance, if your studio is on your property or off your house, homeowners insurance almost 100% of the time won't cover your business losses. They're completely separate things. And if you have an insurer who's saying that your homeowners does cover any business losses, get real clarity on what that looks like and where in your policy it says that, because it's usually just not true. And so we have listings on our website of insurers who provide plans that are tailored to artists, that you can sort through. You can filter by the type of insurance you're looking for, et cetera, to try to get some companies that you can call to get quotes. And then we have tips too on what to think about in going to get a quote, what kind of information you should have prepared in advance, so that if you are making that call to an agent, you're going to get as much out of it as possible and really get towards finding a plan that meets your needs. And then in addition to some of those info resources on our website, we also try to do trainings, whether it's trainings directly with artists around emergency preparedness, or we've done a lot of work training art school faculty to incorporate emergency preparedness into their curricula, so that when students graduate, they're starting their careers with as much information about how to protect that career as possible. And then also kind of on the opposite end of a career spectrum from that, we have a free download from our website called Crafting Your Legacy. And it's around legacy planning, not for the work you create, but legacy planning for your studio practice. And in case that sounds kind of vague, it's born out of hearing from artists who, they'd found out that a friend who was a fellow artist passed away, and then heard that that artist's family didn't have a good understanding of the value of the artist's tools in their studio, and were selling them at garage sales for a couple dollars. And these could be really precious, valuable hand tools that are incredibly hard to find, or something that the artist had made themselves, in fact, to use and have immeasurable value just from how personal and customized those are. So it's thinking through those kinds of provisions within a studio. How do you want to protect your artistic legacy in the process of making your work, and what can you do now to do that? And it runs through case studies that also give other examples to kind of help think about what that might look like. And then we also, again, have some videos beyond just triage and the mold recovery, like I cited. We have a series of videos on taking care of your body as an artist. We partnered with a group called Wellness for Makers. So it's things like how to protect your back while you're working, or if you're standing on your feet a lot for your work, how to hold your body so that you're not damaging your body as you're making your work. And then the other specific,
Carrie,
yeah,
I have a question.
go for it.
We spoke briefly about this on the phone. One thing that the Guild is very interested in doing is offering courses in woodworking. And certainly we have the expertise for that. And many of us have shops where it would be very, very possible to hold a class. But one of the stumbling blocks has always been the liability, so the insurance aspect of it. And I was just curious as to whether your insurance information covers anything along those lines.
Yeah, so in those insurance listings, you can filter down to liability and types of liability, and then at least gives you providers that you can call and start posing those questions, and they give, as much detail as possible. It'd be in my studio, which is in a detached building on my property. I'd be bringing about X amount of people in. And really the thing to do is, find providers who offer liability coverage and then start asking them the direct questions with as much detail as possible so that they know what you need. That you clearly outlined what you need personally, and just start having those conversations, see if you like the answers too. And if you don't like the answers, maybe it's time to call another provider. Seriously, that's one of my biggest pieces of advice on insurance is, you deserve to get your questions answered. And if you're getting a weird feeling about the call, it's not a good provider for you.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
So let me just ask the other members that are on the call. Anybody else have questions or any comments or anything at this point before Carrie
Is
goes
there
on?
any group of exercises or stretches that they could provide for woodworkers? My massage therapist says this is tight and that's tight. Even like descriptions of stretches we could do to get us back in shape again. Because sometimes, you work on a lathe or you work on something, it really hurts after a while. Maybe the guild could take that on, maybe a little different descriptions of stretching exercises we could do, especially in our elderly years. Body didn't want to spring back as well.
Yeah, let me, after I run through this, let me find the link to that series of videos that we have that we did in partnership with Wellness for Makers that run through some exercise that care for different parts of your body. So I'll drop in the direct link for that. And then I'll also link to Wellness for Makers overall website where there might be some other info.
That'd be good.
So yeah.
The massage therapist would like that.
Yeah, I'll make a note to drop those links in after.
That's working. Ben, you had a question.
I did, just a suggestion that maybe everybody has already done, but I took a video camera and videotaped the contents, not only of my house, but of Berkshire Veneer's warehouse, and put that in a safe deposit box. And for fear of fire or flood or what have you, having a digital accounting of the contents of a building, I should think would be prudent for everybody to take a half an hour to make that happen.
Yeah, that's a really great tip. I think that sometimes when inventory gets mentioned, people immediately get overwhelmed by the thought of just a sea of spreadsheets. But it doesn't have to necessarily be that. It can be, taking that video of what you have, or even taking photographs. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need, expensive, specific, detailed software.
No, just something tangible that an appraiser could look at and go, yes, that's a table saw that's worth $5,000 or whatever. It's certainly better than nothing, and it doesn't take very much effort. So.
Yeah, and while you're doing that too, you can do the video and do that narration yourself of, this is the table saw that I bought, in blank year for X amount,
Right.
and just have it built in. Yeah, that's a great way to go about inventory if, especially if spreadsheets make your head spin.
I don't know if anybody else has any questions right now. I can't see everybody again because the screen shows the PowerPoint.
Kristen, I had a comment to add to what Ben said. One suggestion I heard of is, those nuisance manuals that you get with power tools, to hold on to those as proof of ownership. And, write down the serial numbers, when you get the equipment, is very useful if you have an insurance claim.
Yeah, that's useful. Anybody else?
I just think in general, the guild, I told my wife if something ever happened to me, she would not know what the value of the tools. The guild itself, I think, could help people that pass away, the families, to help them determine the value so they wouldn't get screwed. So I just think that's where the guild really helps to come in. So.
Yeah.
Not that I'm planning to kick it off anytime soon, so.
Yep, exactly. You almost, you do it now as a hedge so that, nothing will happen. You at least, that's one way you could look at it.
Anybody else before I spotlight Carrie's video again?
Carrie, I had a question in terms of the grants that you offer folks. I imagine there's some need to establish a financial need, right? I mean, the program's not open to anyone and everyone. Do you have some sort of due diligence process that you go before you provide a grant to somebody, you know, so that the person asking for the grant is establishing some financial need?
Yeah, so we ask for some kind of documentation that helps back up what their emergency was. So, you know, if it was a physical emergency within the studio, you know, pictures of the fire, the flood damage, et cetera. If you have something like, you know, if it was a fire and there's a report from your fire department, send that along, or, you know, a hospital bill, et cetera. Just something that we have, you know, backup if it was a theft, copy of the police report. Because we do, you're right, the other side of the emergency relief work is that it's funded by donors, and we need to be good stewards of those donations. So we have a responsibility to verify that that emergency happened. And then also we ask, you know, just to help make sure that we're helping artists who, you know, the idea is to help an artist get back to making their living with their work. And so also asking for the due diligence of seeing a Schedule C or whatever kind of financial records they can have to show that the emergency was derailing a career and ending their ability to provide their livelihood. And so something that helps verify that component as well.
So folks that carry insurance are not automatically eliminated from the program.
No, because like I was saying, it's a $3,000 grant, so it's not going to make someone whole, but that could be a perfect bridge to an insurance payout.
Or covering a deductible.
Exactly. The thing is, you know, we're not a grant that takes, you know, a month and a half to receive. We say that from receipt of a completed application, it can be up to 2 weeks. It's usually much faster than that. We try to be very quick, try to do it within several days.
That's impressive. Oh.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
we're not on a calendar. We don't have like an application for our standing emergency relief fund. COVID was a little different. For our standing fund, it's not like on a calendar basis, you know, throughout the year where we accept applications between X time and make decisions at X time. It's a rolling basis. We take applications when the emergency happens.
And where do you get the majority of your donations?
Individual artists, gallery owners, suppliers, show producers, private family foundations, some larger foundations for some project work. We do have some work around emergency preparedness that's funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. So it is everything from individual artists to major foundations.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Or before you carry, you can, I guess, go back to what you have shared on your screen. That seems to be working.
Yeah, I'm assuming you all are still seeing that studio safety slide. All right, that thumbs up, like it, thank you.
Reminded everybody to mute yourselves again, just so Carrie doesn't hear any of your background noise. Go ahead.
All right. And so the last piece of the downloadable resource side of our website is we have both the Studio Safety Guide and Studio Safety Poster, which runs through broad stroke studio safety. It's less specific, granular around how to use X type of table saw, but more around what are the considerations around any hazardous materials you might be using, or something that I think is especially timely right now. What's going on around the structure that your studio's in? I'm thinking particularly this time of year where hurricane threat is a risk. So are there any branches hanging over the structure of your building that you might want to address, because come high wind, that branch could very easily go through the roof of your studio and cause major damage. So maybe now is a good time to think about things like that. And with COVID, this is likely less of a concern, but maybe a concern. If you are working in a shared studio building with other artists working in that space, is there anything that they're doing within their practice that might impact you? Or there are people who are using fire in a way that adds more kind of risk to your space? Or I think about if, you know, heaven forbid, someone else like set off the sprinkler system, something that you wouldn't have control over, but could happen if there are other people using the building, what of yours would be at risk because of that? Are there things you could do? Just thinking through that kind of scope of studio safety, you know, what kind of, do you have all the just basic studio safety equipment on hand, you know, eye wash kits, and if that's applicable, or other pieces of equipment. And that's both the guide and the poster are downloadable for free from our website. And so that's a bunch of resources, but kind of in a way to go back to the emergency preparedness piece. We also have money to support those kinds of initiatives to help, you know, work on equipment within your studio, to work on documentation, to work on improving kind of the physical structure of your building. So I thought I would give an example of a couple woodworkers we've provided those Get Ready grants to, and those are grants of up to $500. We typically run 2 cycles a year. This is not like the Emergency Relief Fund, but this is a competitive grant run by cycle. Normally there'd be a deadline coming up in November. We have suspended them currently to focus on COVID relief, but we will get them up and running again a little later as hopefully, fingers crossed, we get a little further out from the pandemic. So I'll give a couple examples of projects that we funded. This is Melquiades Rosario Sastre. She is an artist in Hato Puerto Rico, and she got a grant because during Hurricane Maria, she had real issues with water coming into her studio and damaging her work. And so she used a grant to shore up the windows and the doors in her studio, and then also improve some of the storage spaces she had for storing her work to get it more removed and safe from the windows and doors, and also elevate things off of the floor. And then this is a piece by Ted Lott, who's a woodworker in Coopersville, Michigan. And Ted is good, I think 10 or so years into his career at this point, and realized that, you know, he'd done a pretty good job of documenting his finished works, but did have some pieces that were still unphotographed and needed to upgrade some of his equipment towards photographing his work. He also realized that he needed to get a really solid inventory of his tools and his equipment, and needed some upgraded software to do that, and also just some upgraded technology to work on that as well. And then he also did it with an eye towards that insurance claim piece. Like if something happened, he didn't at this point have the documentation that he would need to back up a claim. And so he wanted to get all of this together and needed some funds to get some equipment to work on that. And then lastly, oops, sorry. The last artist on the right is Martin Hernandez, who was just setting up his first studio of his own in LA, and needed money to help improve his dust management systems, his flammable materials management, and then also his lumber storage systems. And so he used a Get Ready grant for that. But they're, you know, they're available for projects no matter where you are in your career and what you need support with. And so in terms of the, you know, the me talking at you component, that was the meat of it. And just wanted to give a real run through of the scope of the work from the emergency relief side to those various components of the preparedness, whether it's just information resources or, you know, the grants to put some money around supporting artists and actually taking those steps. Because I know that, you know, a lot of those preparedness pieces, you know, they're great ideas, but you know, it's not like there's always extra cash kicking around to support those initiatives. So we do try to provide grants around that. And then I know Frost, and so actually I'll pause there and just see that last bit if there are any additional questions. And at this juncture,
Eric, take it off your screen for a second. I can just see
Yep.
the again. So in case something-
just trying to get back to my full screen mode, sorry.
Okay.
There we go.
we can see your desktop now. Let me get you.
That's someone else's screen.
I wonder whose screen it is.
It's like
You know,
reviewing.
Play the sharing just for any. Wait, I don't know who that is. Hold on a sec. Oh, it's Clark. You're sharing your screen. You have to turn that off because I can see you're viewing Clark's screen. So Clark, bottom of your screen where it says share screen, you click that. So you want to remove that. If you can hear me. Hold on, let's see. Otherwise, stop sharing. Hold on. All right. I gotcha. All right. So I can see everybody again. So does anyone have any questions? You can unmute yourself if you wave your hand if you're not sure. I can get you unmuted. Everybody should be able to uncheck themselves. Anybody?
I did send out some questions for us, and they were included in the invitation that I sent out.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if anyone would like to speak to those questions, which had to do with pretty much with studio safety practices.
Yeah, and I'm happy. I have them in front of me. I'm happy to read them out quickly, just as a refresher of what they were. That would be helpful.
Sure.
Yeah. So I was just curious. You know, since I have the benefits of your knowledge here, just to hear more about how you learn about safe studio practices. I think specifically around woodworking, and how you kind of keep up with that. And if you found any kind of great sources for information for woodworkers around safe studio practices. And I was also thinking about COVID-19 and if there's anything you're doing differently, either in your studio or in just in the way that you work, and what your challenges are and things in particular that would be helpful. And then because I work heavily on the emergency preparedness side of CERF Plus's work, I'm curious to hear if emergency preparedness is at all part of your studio practice, and if so, what does that look like for you and what are you doing? I'm a nerd about the emergency preparedness side of being an artist, so I always love to hear what people do.
Josh and I can chime in.
Please.
I would say he could maybe speak about the shop safety, but I think from an emergency preparedness, this has been very helpful. We don't really have any of that. I mean, we just had a situation happen, and then thankfully the tree that came down missed our shop and our house. So they took out our cars, 2 out of the 3 cars and totaled them. And so in hindsight, just thinking about if it would have landed a couple feet further onto the shop, I don't have any inventory of the shop, so besides brochures, I wouldn't even know where to start. So certainly your website will be very helpful kind of in putting our brain around that, because it just makes you realize you really don't have that preparedness piece of it, right?
And like Ben was saying, it doesn't have to be a complicated inventory to start with. Use a video.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'll confirm that as well. It's starting to get an inventory together on Excel sheets is a huge amount of work, but I think it's all the soft things that are in the shop, your plans, your templates, your jigs, everything that you spent, countless hours working on. I'm in an 1870s barn, if there was ever a fire, I'd be lucky to get myself out, let alone anything else, so I think that emergency preparedness, which is kind of in the back of your mind, but really probably needs to be much more forefront in your thinking, would probably be a really good thing to go through.
And just knowing about the resources, for the monetary resources that are available, specific to craftspeople, right, and the emergency support, financial support to even support in addition to your insurance pieces of it, that the cost that you still incur for unexpected things that occur. We were luckily we were the recipient of a small grant from a similar organization that's not craft-based, but not even, we didn't even know about that. It was someone else that applied for us. So learning about what your agency does, super helpful information.
And I'm wondering, has anyone here done kind of a physical audit of your studio with an eye towards safety and things that you might want to improve, or, you know, looked around with that in mind?
I can give what I've done. So I do have an inventory. I do have basically a picture of a tool and a close-up of the serial number, model number. So that way, either fire or theft or anything, I have a little something to prove I was owner of it. The other thing is, I actually, I don't know, preparedness, but electrical damage, i.e. lightning, actually I had the lightning strike just maybe 2-3 weeks ago. And it did damage one of the tree was struck right next to the building. So it did come into the building and it blew out light bulbs in the shop, and it got into some relays and a capacitor and a table saw. So, I mean, maybe I'm being pessimistic, but the only way you know if you have good insurance, if you need to execute an insurance policy. But luckily it was only like say $60 or $70 worth of parts to replace it. But I don't know if there's much you can do to protect against a lightning strike, but definitely, you know, maybe hurricanes aren't our really danger zone, but I think lightning and wind, or, you know, as Chris said, you know, wind and a tree going through the roof is going to be bad.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's what I have for my shop. And in terms of insurance, yeah, contents, I guess, is some of the verbiage looking for, you know, to look for in insurance. I believe I have contents and replacement cost. So I'm not sure. I know there was some comments about how much it cost, but really, I mean, if I bought a piece of equipment 10 years ago, that replacement cost is going to be higher than what the purchase cost was. So, I mean, if you have an insurance that's amortizing the value of your piece of equipment, I don't think that's a very good policy, in my opinion, because for me, it's what it's going to cost me today to replace a piece of equipment, not what I bought it for 20 years ago. And for that matter, sometimes you find old equipment and you get a good deal on it, and it doesn't really represent the value of what a machine is. If you can't find that deal again, you have to go out in the open market and get a new piece of equipment. So again, that's not necessarily a fair value if you say I bought it for $500 and it's actually, you know, $2,000 piece of equipment.
Carrie, you mentioned too about checking with your insurance company, because the homeowner's insurance policy, just because your shop's attached to the house, doesn't mean it covers it. That the clarification that it's commercial insurance.
Right, a business, yeah, you need a business policy.
I have separate policy from the homeowner.
Yep.
Which really is a drag, because it's an expense whether you're, you know, having a lot of work or not having a lot of work. You know, so that's kind of a, you know, if you're doing part-time work, it's hard to justify a policy like that.
Yeah, the danger though, from what I understand, is if you don't, not only is your, you know, equipment, et cetera, not covered, if the nature of the emergency is tied to the business, from what I understand, and you don't have business insurance, that can negate the homeowner's policy.
Yeah.
So it's a double risk.
Yeah, our agent was explicit that for the first couple of years that we owned our home and were not told we needed separate commercial insurance, that if there had been any type of fire or home emergency, they would have never covered it, because they could have never been proved that it didn't originate in the shop.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's yeah, it's exactly that double kind of, unfortunately, gotcha moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other thing,
Covers too, like the money, like you talked a little bit about that, setting up a shop for eyewash, like a more things that you see now in hindsight, maybe the shop needs some upgrades for. Is that what that explanation was based on that other grant?
The Get Ready grant, yeah, exactly. So it's, you know, improvements to help, you know, protect yourself, you know, or, you know, broader career protection, but just, you know, those kinds of improvements that help mitigate emergencies as an artist.
Anybody else want to chime in?
yeah, I think that business insurance is probably one of my biggest expenses, you know, because the homeowners won't cover the building or the contents. And I think the big thing that I found out was that also if there's anybody that's in your shop and gets hurt, it's not covered by your homeowners. It's got to be covered by a separate policy. You know, if you're selling anything, and that's really probably the biggest part of the thing is having anybody in your shop do anything that gets hurt. You know, it's got to be, you know, your homeowners is probably not going to cover it.
That's part of the business policy. That's part of the business policy that you got to have a, you know, public people coming into your shop, even just to look at a piece of furniture, even if they're not doing anything in it. If they trip and fall or something like that, your homeowners is not going to cover that if it's a business activity.
Yeah, even if they slip in your driveway on some ice.
Yeah, and the question is whether a separate liability policy covers that, you know, commercial insurance, a separate liability, and then an additional homeowners to protect yourself.
Right, and that's when we're just really having clarity from the agent.
Yeah, I think having a list of agents that you can shop around and talk to would be hugely beneficial. It was extremely hard to find some from my shop.
Okay. Yeah, and I was noticing when I was just now pulling up the Wellness for Makers information, there actually isn't a chat that I can drop things into. So what I'll do instead is, Frost, if this works for you, I'll put together a list of links to some of the resources that I've mentioned, so that you don't have to, you know, go through our website and find them yourself, but some direct links to, you know, the insurance, the Wellness for Makers, Crafting Your Legacy, Studio Safety, the Get Ready grants, etc. So that you, Frost, if you're willing to share those out with everyone, you'll have all that at your fingertips.
That would be terrific. I mean, so I mean, I'll write up minutes for this meeting and I'll include that in the minutes of the meeting. That'll be the gold mine that you've left us with. So that's terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to.
If I may, just 10 seconds here, there's a insurance company that I do use for Berkshire Veneer called Federated. And Federated has a significant slant towards woodworkers and woodworking. And if anybody's interested, Marshall Conklin is my rep. And if we wanted to have a guild meeting in the future about having insurance, the topic of insurance be addressed, Marshall would be a really good guy to bring in, and their industry is driven specific, or one of their slants, as I said, is woodworking companies. So they understand our plight. So thank you, Chala, for your comments.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Anyone else?
Yes. I would love to hear about the insurance, because my commercial insurance is so expensive. It's unbelievable. It's like 5 times more than my homeowner's insurance. And my homeowner's insurance, or to put the property together, nobody wants to know that the commercial is on the residential, and the residential doesn't want to know the commercial is there. So I would love to hear. And, you know, I go through Wheeler and Taylor with my insurance, and they're not a woodworker based organization. You know, I have Pennsylvania lumbermen, and, you know, it's just, the commercial is very hard. I have to blow up my policy every few years and start over because it keeps increasing. So Ben, I would love to hear from your insurance rep.
It also sounds like Carrie has a whole program dedicated to introducing craftspeople to different insurers who are interested in insuring craftspeople. And
Yeah,
so, I mean, obviously this topic seems to be dear to everybody's heart, or probably more likely dear to everybody's pocketbook. And so maybe, as Ben suggests, maybe this is something that we could pursue at another meeting directly related to insurance after we've done the research that we would need to do in order to make that an effective meeting.
Yeah, maybe for us, we can take the information Carrie sends to you and then coordinate with Ben and set up another meeting after people have had a chance to look at what Carrie has sent along. And then think
Yeah, send it out to everybody and have them do some research and then bring back what they learned.
Yeah.
Because it does seem to be something that's very important to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the largest expense in my whole business is my commercial policy.
Okay. Anybody else
So,
have questions for
Carrie, is that what you typically hear from other craftspeople?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge too when you find policies that don't have a good understanding of an artist's practice, and then the plans that get offered are more like scaled down version of really large scale manufacturer plans, and they're sort of blown out from what an individual artist is doing or like a small shop is doing. And so the challenge is to find a provider that actually understands what an artist scale business size is, and not like, this giant, furniture manufacturer.
And so I assume that the site that you have with the listing of different insurers are generally people that are aware of what an individual's shop looks like as opposed to a big business.
They're plans for artists.
Uh-huh. Terrific. Sounds like it would be a very valuable thing for this group. Anything else that somebody wants to bring up?
Ben, is that a local rep? I mean, is he a local guy? It's not just like a tools insurance agency or Wheeler and Taylor. Is that a local rep?
It's a nationwide firm. And the rep that I work with is, I think he's out of Westfield, Mass, but he covers Western Mass and down into Connecticut.
Well, that's local because, you
Yeah.
go into Wheeler and Taylor and you can't talk to anybody about that.
Wheeler and Taylor is just another rep, but this gentleman, what's nice about Federated is that they're the company. They're the underwriters directly.
Right.
They're not going through multiple salespeople and paying commissions along the way.
Right. But that info would be great. So thank you. I'll get in touch with you.
I would be only too happy to share it. If anybody, if I'm sure Marshall would love the business. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
And again, we'll get more and more into some specifics around this, whether it be Federated or one of the companies that Carrie can recommend or that CERF Plus can recommend. And so are there any other things that people would like to bring up while Carrie's on?
I do.
Go ahead.
Yes. I just like to know how our organization can support something like CERF. What's our role in supporting that network?
So thank you for asking that. I appreciate that thought. So really, as came up earlier, I really want to reiterate, I hope that none of you ever need our emergency relief fund, but if you hear of an artist who has an emergency, please help connect them with us. If there's someone who you feel like would be comfortable with us reaching out to them directly, give us their contact info. If you think they wouldn't be comfortable with that, let us know we exist, and then encourage them to apply, because sometimes it can take several tries to get over pride. Sometimes, there's a asking for help thing that I think artists don't always like doing, and speaking as Vermonter, New Englanders aren't always great at doing. I know not all of you are in New England, but
I'm a New Yorker. Hey.
I know. But I can speak from that side too as a Vermonter. So just having a friend who might be persistent and getting someone to reach out to us for assistance can make all the difference in making that connection actually happen. I would say if you have newsletters, et cetera, that are sharing out information with broader, artist communities, please share information. A really good way to stay in touch is if you go to our website, which I'm expecting every single one of you to do. I might make Frost check. You know, this might be a topic at a future meeting. What have you learned from CERF Plus's website? Prove it. But on the bottom of every page of our site, there's a spot where you can sign up to get our email messages. We used to just send out a monthly e-news. We're sending out a little more information these days as things change in the COVID world. If we hear of new resources that might be useful for people, we send out emails with that information. If you were interested in those Get Ready grants, we'll definitely be sending an email out when that program is going again. So that's a way to make sure that that doesn't, miss your radar. I'm not going to push this in because it's not my side of the work, but you can also donate to support our work as well. If you can donate generally. If you really want to help fund the emergency relief work, there's an option on our donate page to have all of your donation go to emergency relief. You can restrict it that way if you want to. If you have the means to do that, it's much appreciated. But again, I'm going to go soft sell on donation because it's not my role at the organization. But please, I encourage you all of you to sign up to get our e-blast and e-communication so that you can stay abreast of new resources as they come up. Also, just so you get that reminder that we exist, so that when you do hear about that artist who's had an emergency, we come to mind.
So it would be great. Will you include a link to that with the
the sign-up's on the bottom of every page that I'm going to be linking to.
Great. Good. Thank you. So this is, Chris, do you have something to add?
Just say thank you. It's, very helpful. Really appreciate her Carrie.
Yeah, this was terrific, Carrie. We really, really appreciate you coming. We enjoyed your presentation, and I think we all learned a lot. And we also got stimulated to do a little bit more work around some insurance and around some safety things around our shop and everything else. So it's been very, very good. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you all so much for giving me so much time to talk and for being so receptive to the information. I really appreciate it.
Great. Well, keep going. The CERF Plus sounds like a terrific organization. So.